A recent Morning Consult survey found that 55% of U.S. adults with credit cards have debt on them. And according to the New York Federal Reserve, debt overall is the levels higher than previous peaks seen ahead of the 2008 financial crisis. But credit card companies appear to be denying responsibility that look a lot like financial and corporate institutions back in 2008.
A recent piece in the New Republic by former Capital One employee Elena Botella exposed the lack of corporate accountability by Capital One, which collects $23 billion in interest per year. Elena wrote, quote, "It's no rhetorical exaggeration to say that the 3,000 white-collar workers at its headquarters are making good money off the backs of the poor." Elena Botella is now a contributing writer at the New Republic, and she joins us now. Welcome. Congratulations on the piece.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here.
So first of all, before we jump into the details, did you reach out to Capital One? Have they sent you any comment after the article?
I did not reach out for comment before publishing this piece, and no spokespeople have reached out since.
Okay.
So.
Gotcha. All right, so tell us what you found and what your experience was working there.
Yep. So as you mentioned, Capital One collects $23 billion in interest per year, and that amount works out to $181 per U.S. family. So quite a significant amount, right? And as you mentioned, not everybody has a credit card. Not everybody who has a credit card carries credit card debt, right? So if you just think about all those facts together, like it stands to reason that there's quite a few families paying $800 to Capital One per year, $1,000 or more.
God, that's insane.
Right. And yeah, and it's, I mean, not surprisingly, who has credit card debt? Like people who are already struggling to make ends meet, right? So that extra expense of the interest can be quite crushing.
And specifically, I think you oversaw, you said the bank's secured card product, and that's the card that's marketed to people with bad credit. They can't, you know, they have a credit credit limit of $300, 27% interest rate. What was it about that card and the predatory practice that you say you saw that was bad?
Yeah, so secured cards, I think, are really interesting and kind of difficult products to wrap our heads around because on the one hand, I mean, who gets secured cards? People who've been basically turned down for every other credit card option, right? And so on the one hand, these are in some ways marketed and understood by regulators as a good thing to help people get back into the credit card market or get back into, you know, rebuilding their credit for a home or a car one day if they've struggled in the past. And certainly for some people that can be true, right? But one thing that Larry Santucci from the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia has found is that more than 70% of people who have secured cards pay interest on them, right? So Capital One's product, which is, you know, probably better than some in the marketplace and worse than others, if you pay your secured card in full every month, you can pay no interest, right? And like it's free. So for some people that is clearly great, right? But if everybody used the secured card like that, right, like I think it also stands to reason it actually would no longer even be offered, right? Because it wouldn't make money.
Yeah, they need to make money.
Yep, and so for people who have struggled with credit in the past, many of them then go on to get this product and then continue to struggle, right? So they continue to pay high amounts of interest, high amounts of like late fees that can go up to $39, so pretty expensive relative to a small credit line. And I think looking at the credit card industry overall, I think the secured card is just emblematic of this broader problem, which is that it is the case that some people, these products help, right? And if nobody was helped by these products, like I think it would be a different story, right? But I think we're in a very difficult situation because there's some people who use them either to rebuild their credit to, you know, build towards a house, or they have urgent borrowing needs. Our country obviously has a very limited social safety net. Sometimes the credit card is somebody's best option, and yet at the same time, it also exacerbates poverty for a lot of people, right? And can make situations worse and worse over time.
So, I mean, you seem like a nice person. We've just met. I'm sure your colleagues, your coworkers were good people, nice people. How did people feel about what they were doing, and how were they able to justify some of the, you know, less sort of ethically okay parts of the job?
Yeah, so I think there's really kind of two big pieces that work together, right? So one is that as long as there's anybody who benefits, then I think it's really easy to tell yourself that it's the majority of people that benefit, whether or not you're collecting that data, whether or not you're doing that research, which, as I point out in the piece, it would be like very much possible for Capital One to reach better answers about you know, everything ranging from what percentage of their consumers actually benefit from the loans to even things like as they raise interest rates, how does that impact, you know, child hunger in America, right? So I think there's this one piece of people pointing to the fact that some percentage of people clearly benefit,
Right.
and then they just say, well, everybody else is not my problem, right? Or they really focus on the benefits at the expense of ignoring the fact that, like, I think probably every listener knows or has heard of a friend or a family member who struggled with credit card debt, right?
Sure.
And then I think the other piece is, Capital One has really prided itself historically on being a very analytical company. I'm not the first journalist to write an article about Capital One's kind of focus on experimentation. Fast Company reported that Capital One conducts 80,000 experiments per year. And, that fact about Capital One, I think historically has actually been kind of celebrated in the press, right? Or, wow, so high tech, that's great. But it also then means, if you think about how business strategies get designed, I can, if I'm an analyst at Capital One, I can run a bunch of experiments, build models off of those experiments and the models are really doing the heavy lifting of designing the strategy.
You're thinking about numbers and models rather than human beings. I mean, in your job,
Right.
did you ever really have to interact with people who were struggling with the debt that they were saddled under?
I took it upon myself at some points during my time at Capital One to go and talk to our customers, but I think a typical Capital One analyst could work for 5 years and not ever talk to a Capital One customer.
So here's the real thing: is you're talking about experimentation, but the thing is about experimentation to like what end, right? So like, and to the end always seems to be to like maximize profit, and the real question is like, how do these companies actually make profit, which
Right.
is through debt, right? And interest on debt.
Yep.
Okay. So how did you see that within the company?
So I think like a good example is, Capital One compared to its kind of peer group of like Chase, Citi, Discover, it is relatively high yielding, right? And by high yielding, what I mean is that its profit margin for its loans is relatively high. Okay. And so that's a fact that if you're kind of talking about the company's strategy, right? If you aren't thinking about it at all from the perspective of customers, you can celebrate that fact, right? So you can say, this shows that we're doing such a good job, right? Because we're quote unquote high yielding. And you can celebrate that as like we should all pat ourselves on the back for a job well done. Or you can say, well, actually, we're finding ways to extract more money out of each customer than any of our competitors, right? And so I think when you take that lens of, we're all analysts, sort of similar. I'm sure a lot of readers read the Stitch Fix article earlier this week where they talked about astrophysicists moving over to Stitch Fix to, pick out clothing, right? So when people really love math, I think they can abstract away and say, well, this is all just equations, and actually what business unit I'm actually in is sort of irrelevant, right? And the focus is all on
that makes sense.
the data and the experimentation.
Yeah, and as Sagar said, it's all about, well, what's the goal? The goal is ultimately to extract as much money from these people as you can, not to help them.
Right.
And if some are helped, that's sort of incidental to the process.
Right. Yeah.
Elena, thank you so much. Congratulations on the piece. Great
Thank
to
you,
have
Elena.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Coming up, the Bidens are back in the news as Vice President Joe Biden's son Hunter steps down from the board of a Chinese company while he rebuts attacks by the president.
And a new poll has Senator Elizabeth Warren overtaking Biden just days before they hit the debate stage together. Team Rising is going to chop that up next when Rising continues.